So nutrient management plans. This is kind of, again, perfect world stuff. This is a robotic dairy outfit. There's a computer in a control room, and there's piles of records there. It's great stuff. What do we see when we look at this? Hands up. What's wrong with this picture? Yes, on the front.
Looks like a spill about to happen.
Yes, the storage is full. There's less than a foot of freeboard on there. So, getting back to my talk about communication and even compassion. This is a symptom of what's really happening. There may be a death in the family. There may be struggles with management. There might be financial problems. There might be a long list of human issues that may result in this event. So, as AGIOs, when we see things like this, that is something that we certainly consider. What do you see here? What do you see here? Hands up. It's leaking. If it's running in, it's running out. So it's that particular tank may have met the end of its useful life. Yard runoff. Does this meet the definition of permanently vegetated area? It's running right across the road, not just a little bit. I got this guy to make some changes, and they weren't big changes, they were just changes. And it really, really improved things a lot. And so I'm a decent guy. So I went back and to his place and said, I knocked on his door and said, thanks. And he really appreciated that. Actually, what he said was, it's not like I had the choice. But I still said thanks. Silage runoff. I mentioned bunker, Jasper, you mentioned bunker silage earlier today? Who did? It's deadly stuff. Oh yes, and it should go to manure, liquid manure storage. It shouldn't be plumbed to a creek. And this is where bunker silage runoff has been plumbed to a creek. It's hitting the creek on the right, and you can see the black plume to the left, and it killed, I bet you, 2 kilometers of creek. And it had been going on for years. But it's better now. Vegetated buffer strips. This is a photo from 2005, and this is a photo of where we have made things better. You have made things better. With your producers, you're saying, make sure that you are getting your vegetated buffer strips in there. And that's 3 meters from the top of nearest bank to surface water. This is what a typical buffer strip looked like in 2005. And now this is what a lot of buffer strips, I would say most buffer strips look like that. There's still the odd one that's a bit narrow. And if you see that, remind them. But it makes a huge difference in water quality, huge difference. Dead stock. Perfect world. You know, you got a bin, it's halfway down the lane. It's nice and tidy. And there's some, where there's livestock, there's dead stock. And you've got 48 hours to dispose of it. The one on the left is looking a little green, but and generally, to be fair, when we get calls on dead stock, I start the 48-hour clock right away. I mean, I give them 48 hours to deal with it from the time where I make contact. Composting, I'm a firm believer in keeping the nutrients on the farm. Composting is an awesome thing if it's, but it's got to be done correctly. There's a ton of nutrients in a dead beast, and it's great when it's kept on farm. But this one is being scavenged. And that one, who can tell me what's wrong with that? His picture is taken from a roadway, public. It can't be seen, accessible to public view. But there's always a reason, right? It's a human element. It was long weekend and new help. So again, perfect world stuff. We've got composters run perfectly. There's dead stock. There's record keeping related to dead stock. And this particular farmer, he keeps his records at the bin. See, bin number 1, those are his records. And they meet the requirements. And they're awesome. The one on the right, he's got it so locked down, he's got a roof on it. That's awesome stuff. NASM, any NASM plan prepares here. Excellent. I thought I'd say a little bit about NASM. Both of these slides show spreading, but lots of times it's injected. Who can tell me what may be a concern here? Depth to groundwater, good eye. What's the concern here? Pooling and ponding. But the legislation says must make all reasonable steps to prevent pooling and ponding. That's much different than there must be no pooling and ponding. But that being said, and this is why I included these slides, if you're a NASM plan preparer, and if you're doing a NASM plan, and if you've got some, you know, if NMAN says they can put on some outrageous amount, like 12 or 13,000 gallons the acre, it's maybe not it might not be a good idea to go to the maximum rate. Because if it gets into, if it looks like this, if it gets into surface water through the tile, we're gonna probably be asking a bunch of questions. And it's, when it gets to the tile and when it gets to the surface water, and we start sampling, that's when it gets very serious. I call that the relationship becoming much more formal. Any guesses on what this is? Some of you may have seen this slide before. That is a river of septic tank waste going through the forest. The guy this is a septic hauler, and he was driving across an approved site to stationary dump in the woods. And it was running through the woods, out onto a field, into a Hickenbottom to a creek. So, spill events. This is a typical spill. How are we doing for time? I'm a bit over, sorry. But I'll just run through this really quickly. This was a transfer event, transferring from one tank to the other, and it got on into running towards a culvert. I've learned that if I think I need help, I call help, and I got some colleagues to help me. This is across the road. The ditch was open, so they grabbed a sample, and we tested for odor and color. It was clear. As it turned out, the snowplow had created a berm of really thick snow between the spill event and the road that held it out of the culvert, and they recovered it with a vacuum truck. And we were not too sure if it had got to the culvert, but it hadn't, and it had actually stayed on top of the snow. So it looked a lot worse than it did, but still there was maybe 40,000 gallons of liquid dairy running towards the creek. And then, this is really cool, I've learned in my job not to be prescriptive. I like to let people create their, I have learned that if people are given the opportunity to provide input, they will astound you with their creative abilities. And this guy he got the largest snowplow in the neighborhood, I think in the county. I think it was used at the airport. And what was left, he blew over probably a 10 or 7 acre area. And there was, our concerns for it getting to the creek were minimalized. This is my pet peeve, burn piles. And I think just as we're making things better, I think there's fewer of these around, but still far too many. Oh yeah, and putting it in a big can is going to make it better. These things are nasty. They're actually managed through the municipality, but if it involves waste being brought in and burned, then we're involved. cattle access to surface water. I'm from cattle country, and we have wild brook trout in my neighborhood, but they don't live here. They used to live here, but cattle access to surface water is really hard on surface water. And it astounds me because electric fence is easily installed and very affordable. Recommendations. So if you've got clients and they need a nutrient management strategy, make sure they understand it. Go over this strategy with them, and I know everybody's really good at that, and I commend you for that, and I can see the process improving because of your efforts. But as a reminder, if they need to have a nutrient management plan, it has to be followed, and if it's not followed, then that can be covered off with the annual review and update. Make sure that the contingency plans are actually accurate to that operation. The annual review and update is really important to cover off any annual changes. We mentioned post-construction changes in information. Follow up. Pick up the phone and call your client and say, you built that barn. Was it the way you thought it was? Did it turn out the way you thought it would? Records are important because they're a proof of due diligence. Vegetated buffer strips. If you see one a bit narrow, just be my guest to remind them. And this is most important. I've included this in your handout. It's got lots of crazy colors, but those colors are important because that shows you which Ag EO is covering that area and their appropriate phone number. If you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to call us. We'd be happy to help. Because this is the bottom line. Clean air, clean water, clean land. Thank you. Any questions? Well, I'll take one or two real quick ones. Yes?
How accurate are your well records, particularly how accurate and timely are your decommissioned well records?
Well, as you know, Jasper, there's a million wells in the country, and some wells are documented and others are not. So I would say most wells, if they're, say, since 1960 are documented. Decommissioning records may be accurate, but the Reg 903 under the OWRA is, it allows for the owner of the well to decommission their own well, as long as they're doing it to the standard. And that person may or may not know about the requirement for records of decommissioning.